All right, everyone. I am joined today by a talented comic book creator, Jason Douglas. He is the one who brought to life the parallel comics from the Source Point Press. Say hi to everyone, Jason.
Hello, everybody. It is very, very nice to be here today. Thank you for having me on. I can't wait to talk.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I mean, I interviewed you via email for the Cultured Nerd a few months back when I first heard about the comic, and ever since then, I mean, I've read it I'd say at least 3 times. It just speaks to me on such a deep level. If you want to go ahead and sum up kind of what Parallel is all about.
Well, I'll tell you this first. I'm really glad to hear you say that because one of the main goals, I think, maybe not from day one, because from day one, this being my very first comic script, like it'd be a bit of a question if you said I knew exactly what I was doing from day one. There's a bit of like leap of faith from getting in front of the computer and writing the very first thing you're going to write as far as fulfilling your dream of writing a comic. But certainly in the process, one of the things that I really, really wanted to hopefully capture is a rereadability. And whether that's through the ambiguity of like some of the messages, certainly through Adam's art, but like that idea, as a longtime comic fan myself, that idea of it's not necessarily month to month disposable. Like you might want to go back and read it again because of how you felt about the ending, say, which we won't completely spoil here today,
Right.
I think. and going back and suddenly you read it differently because you're like, oh, that reveal, and now that there's clues, and yeah. So I'm really, really happy to hear you say that.
Yeah, the
As
the
far as
very
the book,
first
yeah.
the very first reread I did was almost immediate. I was like, there's got to be clues somewhere here that I missed along the way. And then I went back about a month or so ago and just read it again. The story, like I said, it just speaks to me on such a high level. Where most regular comics, I mean, I enjoy them because they're fun or cool. This has such a deep meaning for me, and I think a lot of people would as well.
Well, I'm glad to hear that too. And that's something I think we can probably talk about here in a bit about some of the intent behind it and some of the themes that really motivated why I wanted to write it. But in general, you've got Parallels, a story that is on its surface, it's about our main character, Landon, who's pushing 30. And he has come to that point in his life that popular nomenclature calls the quarter life crisis, right? And whether that's, quarter life for you or your midlife crisis or whatever, he's going through something that I think a lot of people, if not most people, go through some version of. And that's, you hit this point in your life and there's a bit of stagnation or worse, maybe a stalling, maybe a depression. Basically the result of all those hopes and dreams that you had in your younger years, your late teens, your early 20s, when the future seemed infinite and possibilities seemed infinite and your dreams were really just a step away. And then life happens, right? And you pause and you get in that relationship, or you take that job, or you fulfill that immediate need of comfort because you've got a bill to pay. And those dreams get put on a back burner. And because time is the way time is, and it never slows down no matter how bad you want it to, you wake up a year later, a decade later, and you're wondering what happened. And that's kind of what's happening to Landon here. He sets aside, in his case, it's music, right? And he sets that aside, and it's been now 5 to 8 years, and it's like, where did all that go? And thematically, the book is really at its core about, is it too late, right? That existential dread of, I've let that go, and now it might be too late because time marches ever forward. Where the book gets kind of dark and fun and twisted is the sci-fi premise behind it, which is Landon starts to, at his lowest ebb, right, starts to hear voices and see visions of this other alternate dimension version of himself who didn't set his dreams aside for X and Y reasons, as so many of us do, and is kind of offering that elusive second chance, but it comes at a price, right? And the big question of the book is, at least on the sci-fi twist level, is that price worth it? And as you kind of read through the 64 pages of this kind of graphic novel, it's definitely not necessarily in Landon's best interest mentally or physically in the here and now, right, what's being offered, even though it is truly his heart's desire.
So, can you go in a little detail about your inspiration and what made you decide to write a comic book? I mean, I know you said you had dreams, as many of us do, to do comics and stuff like that, but what really jumped you into gear?
With that, it's like one of my favorite questions because it's like so interwoven and like complex. There's literally three, and apologize. I apologize profusely for the almost pun here. There are literally three parallel strands of inspiration and catalysts that kind of are running parallel to each other for a long periods of time, and then crashing into each other and interweaving, which is kind of reflected in, there's some visuals in the book that are actually a literal manifestation of that. Anyway, I think you can probably start by, me personally, I'm of a certain age where that existential dread is like a real thing every single day, right? I'm no spring chicken, and here I am with this decades long dream because of my comic fandom that like, this has always been something I wanted to do. And yet, you name it, life, day to day, and literally decades of time, it just never happened. And yet it was always there. And, every day you get older and you get further away from that, it can eat away at you more and more, and it manifests the way it does. So you've got that going, but that's not enough. That was never enough. That one thing was never enough to actually push me in the direction of pursuing that dream. The next thing that kind of came together was the actual idea for like the parallel world conceit. Okay. And that was me and a buddy of mine, a fellow teacher friend of mine, went to college with, and also a lifelong comic fan. And we were just brainstorming one day about that possibility, which is, it's almost a comic book / sci-fi trope, but we were talking about alternative realities and whatever. And what happens if it intrudes on your life and actually interacting with it. And so there's this seed of an idea, right? But again, even with both of those things going, not enough to overcome the inertia of not doing anything. Okay.
Yep.
And then the third thing, which is the true catalyst for me actually physically sitting down one summer and opening up the laptop and hitting the first keys and making the first 32 pages of the script, came from former students of mine. And I've been a teacher long enough, a public school teacher long enough, where I've got these kids who used to be in my elementary school classroom who are now literally Landon's age, right? 28, 29, pushing 30. And I'm still in contact with a few of them. And, without naming names or anything, there's one that really pops in my head specifically, where she and I were talking this one day, and she was just like, here I'm at this age, and I am not in Chicago dancing with the studio that was always my dream. Do you know what I mean? And it was literally her waking up, and it was like 6 years had gone by, and this thing that was a half a step away is now so far in the past that, at least in her mind, it's now unattainable. And it just clicked. And those three things came together, and I sat down and I started the process.
So why don't you let everyone know a little bit about your process? Like, you say just open up a computer? I'm sure you've had like those scenes in like the detective dramas where they have like a million red strands on a chalkboard or a caulkboard, just showing like all the different connections.
Yeah, very true. Very true. Most of that was in my head, though I actually saved some of them. I do have the most incomprehensible. There's a handful of like just computer pages where I am just writing. I've got terrible handwriting anyway, and like just drawing and writing all over these pages, where I was like, I want to save this because I want to see where I started from. And I look at those today just occasionally because it's like in the stack of papers that are related to the project. And I can't make heads or tails of what the crap I was doing or thinking at that time. Like occasionally I'll see a word, like it might say like panel, whatever. And I go, well, I recognize the word panel, but there's beyond that. I have no idea what I was even talking about at the time. Apparently it worked though. But it's a really good question, because I did not, it's not completely out of the blue. But the process of getting where I got to and writing the script is definitely probably not your typical way that, somebody makes their first comic, because I wasn't coming into the writing experience as a newbie. I was coming into the writing comics experience as a newbie, right? No matter what the fandom said, no matter how many back matter in trade paperbacks I read where it has so-and-so script and you're looking at it. Because in the intervening years where, writing a comic is in a back burner, I was actually writing plays. And that was never the original dream, but that was something that kind of came to me through circumstance, having a love of the theater, and then as a public school teacher, starting a drama club in elementary school and then in middle school, and us having no budget and thus having to improvise. I was like, well, I can't afford to buy a play for these kids that we got to put on, so I guess I should just write my own. And again, kind of that almost ignorance is bliss thing, not knowing that would be hard. But I had done that for so many years before attempting this, that I had another bit of ignorance is bliss moment where I thought, well, if I can do this, because I can close my eyes and I can see a stage, and I can block this, and I know exactly how many pages it takes to do 60 minutes on the stage, and I know exactly how to pace that dialogue. I was like, well, this is going to be easy. Had I known, I don't care how motivated I was to write a comic, I bet you I wouldn't have done it. Because it is a vastly different animal. And so I think the literal manifestation of your, detective novel or a detective in the room with the strands and the note cards connecting on a bulletin board behind you was, even as I was writing the first 32 pages of this, which I wrote kind of in a vacuum, okay? That I wrote the first 32 pages because I felt I needed to tell this story. Not because there was a plan, not because there was a publisher, not because I even had one iota of knowledge of what to do after the story was on the page, but because I had to tell the story. And the balancing act in my head was obviously the story, the deeper themes underneath that story that I thought were the important things that had to get across, which I think is some of the stuff that you related to and gives it a readability and the relatability for so many people. On top of that, structuring, like the visual structure of a comic script is so different than any other kind of writing. There is nothing else. Film's got some elements of it, like storyboarding for a film's got some elements of it. There's nothing that is exactly like a comic where you are literally having to think about story and dialogue and pacing in the context of panel size, panel numbers per page, even like if you want a piece of information revealed or not revealed on a facing page versus flipping the page over. There's it feels like a million things at once. And then pile on top of that, because it's your first script, you don't physically know how to write a script. Like, even if you've written a play before, it's not the same thing. And I did that internet research where I found this Fred Van Lente script online, which was very much just there. Okay, here's the physicality of it. And there was a muscle memory process for the first several days of sitting down this one summer typing, where you're going, no, dude, you got to indent 4 times, because that's where that piece of the script actually lives. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you've got to put that in parentheses, because that's where you put that this is a sound effect and not, a thought balloon or whatever. And learning that at the same time that you're trying to tell this in-depth story, that you're trying to have these underlying, sometimes subtle, not so subtle themes, as well as, that panel is too big, or I've got too much dialogue on that page, all at once. I think what allowed me to do that was quite literally, I didn't know better. If, if I had known all of that on day one, it might have been enough to scare me off of the whole thing.
No, I that's funny, because I definitely understand the feeling of that because I was planning on doing this podcast starting next year, and then The Mandalorian came out, and I was just like, you know what? No, I got to talk about this. I'm going to do it now. And then that first episode, when I tell you it took 150 takes, no questions asked, to get that. It was only 38 minutes, something like that. And it took me 3 days, because I had no idea what it was about, what I had to do to get it done. And I just jumped in. And again, like you said, I'm the very same way. If I would have known just how much work this podcast was, I probably wouldn't have dove in. But like you, I'm glad I did. And that naivete of just, I want to do this, so I'm going to try and see what happens. It can make some of the great things.
It's like a protective bubble. It's great. Right. Yeah. I mean, you make a lot more mistakes when you don't necessarily have the knowledge, but the hardest step, and this is the thing that I tell anybody who asks me, how do you start? How do you take that first step? And the answer is pretty simple. You just do it.
Yep.
And that's the hardest thing to do, but you just have to do it. And if you're in that kind of protective bubble of you don't know better, it's a lot easier to take that first kind of scary step, and then you're in it, right? And then there's always, and then something exists in the world, right? You're that first recording, whether you liked it or not, now existed in the world, right? Those first couple of pages I typed now exist in the world, and it's like a toehold, like on the beach, like you've got purchased, and now you can go back and fix what you've got or move forward, or both at the same time. But like that never happens if you don't do anything. Like whenever anybody asks me, like, what advice do you have for somebody else, I tell them what Neil Gaiman told me when I met him years ago. And it's just like, the way you write a comic is you write a comic.
Yep.
Right. And it's as simple as that. It almost sounds trite. It almost sounds dismissive, but he was serious. And I get what he says. Like, if you don't do it, I tell students this, right? Like, I can't promise you what happens next when you take this risk, when you make this choice, right? But what I can promise you, what I absolutely can tell you, is if you don't do it, nothing will happen, right? Like, if you didn't record that podcast, you don't have a podcast. If I didn't start typing, there's no script. Because, and I think there's something about this in parallel too, like message wise, it's always easier to do nothing than something. It's always easier. Like, as much as it might be eating away at you, that your dreams are slipping away, or like, I call it dreams deferred, right? It's still it's easier to be inert, right? It's easier to just let time happen to you, as opposed to being, master of your own destiny and actually taking that risk and that leap, right?
Yeah. So that's your student, because you still teach. Do they treat you differently now that you're a comic book creator?
No, I mean, they know about like the plays that I've published, because those are actually out there in the world. Parallel, because I mean, on one hand, the themes are pretty heavy and pretty dark, and there's a lot of language in this book that I have never used in the classroom. So, being a middle school teacher, there's a certain like, we don't necessarily need to openly advertise this and that kind of thing. So, there's a lot of high school kids right now, and definitely a lot of former students, college kids, that are like, oh yeah, I'm well aware. Follow you on Instagram. Bought a copy of the book. Hooray! Will you sign up for me? Of course I will. I used to see my name on your stuff all the time. But it was just usually a bad grade. But but like, as far as like the kids, I mean, it's one of those things where I wouldn't necessarily even be comfortable having the kids that I teach read it. And it's even like the double whammy of, it's not even necessarily the content. Like the adult themes are not like scandalous. They're like, I bet you at your age you'd be bored by it too. Whereas right. You might fully relate to it. They haven't even gotten to that part in their life yet. So there's gonna be things that they're just gonna be like, oh, that's pretty cool, good for you, but like, I don't get it. So
where's the guy with the key?
It's like openly advertised in my room. No.
Right. Well, so you said you were kind of new to the process. You didn't really know. So why don't you tell, because your story, when I interviewed before, the story about how you actually got it done and got into the Source Point Press and did everything you did. Why don't you tell that story? Because that's a good one.
Oh, so yeah. Again, very unorthodox, right? This is not the typical way. It ties in again to ignorance is bliss. I was in this protective bubble of just not knowing how it worked. And thus I made the choices I made, and it turned out the way it did. None of those choices I would have made had I known this is actually the more common, proper path to hopefully getting something published. So what happened is, like I said, I kind of wrote that first 32 pages in a bubble. It was the compulsion of everything coming together, and this is the moment. So I took a summer where I normally would have written the next play, and I did this instead, right? And I got through it, and I got to this point in the book. It's that point in the book where, without giving away too much, where Landon kind of wakes up, comes out of the coma, and realizes that it's, at least in his mind, everything's really happening to him. And it's just like, boom, it's a splash page, a big, beautiful Adam Ferris splash page right in the middle of the book. And that's where I stopped. And in my mind, I'm like, well, I guess that's like an oversized first issue. And I know that before I type another page, even though I kind of pretty much know what's coming next, at least in the broad strokes, well, it's time to poke in the waters and find out, like, what do you do with this now, right? Is it worth it going forward? Like, is there an avenue where this could be in the world? And because I'm like an old man who is at least technology wise and staying in touch with technology is even probably decades older than my actual physical age. Okay. The idea that 90% of new comics these days are crowdsourced, right? That it's on Kickstarter, that's whatever. If you want to get your work out into the world, it's online, and it's through it's funded through crowdfunding. And that just wasn't, I'm still thinking 1970s publishing, apparently in my head. Right? I'm still thinking like what you do is you physically print out a copy and you take it to a human, like in an office somewhere, who's probably wearing plaid pants, and you hand it to them. They say, "I like the cut of your jib, young man," and they like give you a job. I mean, not quite that ignorant, but pretty darn close. Now, I did poke around. I was poking around online, and I'm like looking at these companies' websites, and pretty discouraging. I won't lie to you. Like nobody wants. I mean, there's very few companies that take unsolicited submissions in the first place, and those that do, they certainly don't want your script. They want your art, right. Maybe a pitch, and that's nobody wants my art, so that was not going to happen. So I kind of fell back to this decades old understanding of how the comic industry worked, and I quite literally printed out copies of the script, went to my classroom and put it in the, imagine your elementary, middle school, high school classroom, like those manila folders, those file folders, yep. Right? Yep. Put it in there, color paper clips from my desk, right? Because and like paper clip things together. And I got my pitch in there. I got my 32-page script in there. I've got my cover letter. Like it's like I'm going for a job interview, right? Right. And I take this stack of these things and I go to my local con, which is Motor City Comic Con. This is now like 3 years ago. And I'm like, well, you look at the booths and some of them are artists and some of them are makers and some of them are small press publishing. And the very first booth that just leapt in front of my eyes, because they have a beautiful booth, was Source Point Press. Okay. Michigan-based company, but this was in the year before they became 10 to 12 books a month in previews contributor. Okay, so they are still just crushing it on the con circuit at this point. Okay, like really, really making their bones in the con circuit, doing really, really well. So look at this beautiful setup, and I'm drawn to it. And then I lock eyes with one individual behind the counter. There's a bunch of people back there, and I'm pretty sure I can swear by this that the reason why I was drawn to this individual, I'm going to walk up to this person who looks like, they belong there, and I'm gonna hand them this envelope, this folder, was because he had the most glorious, full, just Nordic, Norse mythology red beard. And I'm like, that's the kind of guy I would look. You got a beard like that, I want to talk to you. And through, fate, kismet, luck, whatever you want to call it, it just happened to be Travis McIntyre, who is the co-founder, president, and editor-in-chief of Source Point Press. And that's who I handed the envelope to. And he, no joke. I mean, I made a joke about it earlier. He was like, "Are you trying to pitch me a comic in 1970? Like, what is happening here?" You know what I mean? You don't even have it on a flash drive, which would be 10 years out of date. But it's like this paper copy. And he's like, "All right, I like what you're saying to me. I like this weird thing you're trying to do. I'm going to take it home tonight. I'm going to read it. You come back to the con tomorrow. We'll talk." And that's kind of what started it. And he picked me up there and hooked me up with Adam Ferris as an artist, and then Bob Sally, who's a heck of a writer himself, as my editor, and like the process began. But I have to be really careful because I used a terrible word that I have been warned by my colleagues to be very careful about using in interviews. And I used the word luck. And fellow creators get very mad when you overemphasize the word luck because it diminishes the hard work that the creators put into their work, right? And I have to admit that, like, how lucky you are doesn't create the actual script. It doesn't create the actual art. It doesn't put the book into the world. Do I have a hard time completely dismissing the fact that step A led to step B, and had I taken even the slightest left or right turn, I'm not talking to Travis? Of course not. Had I done it some other way, had I made some other choice, do I end up here? Probably not. and that screams luck to me. But you have to be really, really careful as a creator not to dismiss the hard work of you, and maybe even more importantly, the hard work of the other people who worked with you to get this dream fulfilled. So you got to be careful with that word too. But that's how it started.
Well, and then that comes back to like, if you do what you have to do, you get what you want to say out. If it's meant to be, it's going to happen. I always go back to all is as the force wills it. I mean, if it's meant to be, no matter if you have to put in that hard work to get to that spot where it can even be possible. But if you have that vision that something you want to do, if you don't do that first step, like you said, to get there, then it doesn't matter if you're the luckiest person in the world. But you can't do it without a little bit of, some people call it, like you said, there's no real word for it. You just know it's just the steps that led to that moment to get to there. It may not be luck, it may not be fate, but it was the way to get there. That's the hard work, and that's everything that has to be appreciated. And I know personally, like when you try to start doing something and it doesn't work out initially, like you had all those crossroads where you were getting discouraged. You could have stopped right there. You could have stopped right there, and you didn't. You just kept really, you know what? I'm just going to do it, and I'm going to keep doing it, and we're going to see what happens. And that is what a lot of people forget about when they hear luck.
Yeah,
but it
absolutely.
can't be understated.
And it's not even just like in the beginning phases, like making a comic, especially a small press book, it's not overnight. I think one of the things I've learned from this process that I definitely took for granted as a fan, and especially a younger fan, was the immediate gratification. Even though, the comic book industry was the thing where you had some built-in delayed gratification because of the monthly nature of it, it was still, once it was in your hands and you spent your 10 to 20 minutes reading your monthly floppy, your 20 to 22 pages, it's pretty much instant gratification. And you really take for granted, or at least I did, how much work and time and effort goes into and how many people are behind that kind of thing, no matter how many names are on that credit page. And this was a multi-year process, and even along the way there were points where something hit a snag, or I got my first set of notes from Bob Sally as the editor and I got ridiculously precious. I was like, no, I just don't want to do this. I like literally called my buddy who like was my lawyer, who made sure the contract was up to snuff, and was like, so I can get out of this, right? Because he's asking me to change this one panel, and that's just unacceptable. And of course he was right. He was absolutely right about every single note he gave me, because he's a way better comic creator than I am. But you know what I mean? Like there's so many things along the way where even there you go, this is hard. And it's given me very much a new appreciation for the time and the blood and the sweat and the tears, from the creative team to the publicists to everybody along the way who puts their heart and soul into this thing that we all love. And not disparaging the big two in any way, but like the level of family and the level of love and compassion and true passion that goes into making indie comics is unparalleled, right? This is not, it's not a job for anybody at SourcePoint Press. It's just not a job. It might put food on the table for a lot of them, but it's 100% their passion. You don't start a company like SourcePoint from the ground up, hoping to become rich, hoping to become famous, probably even hoping to put clothes on your back, because that's not the way indie comics work. And for them to have built this into it, it took the love and passion that's in all of their hearts, and then that shows in all the books too. So it's something I'm really proud of, to be a part of that.
Yeah, it goes back to that old adage, if you love what you do for work, you never work a day in your life.
Right, for sure.
Yeah, so I mean that'd be something that I can only imagine. And would you ever want to do comics full time?
Full time? Well, it's not, for very few, like very rarely do you get to make comics, right? And even rarer do you get to make the choice about whether you get to make comics or not.
Right.
And even rarer than that is, do you get the choice of how much of your time and effort and whatever it takes up. I mean, I'm a teacher and I've got kids, and would in a certain reality, there you go, in a certain reality, um, um, would I like to do this every single day? Of course I would. I mean, but I'm at this point where this is my first book, right? The release of it got completely and totally derailed by COVID and quarantine, right? I still haven't done a signing. I still haven't done a con, right? My dozen of those. I mean, my spring and summer that was supposed to be slated with that obviously got postponed, if not flat out canceled. I'm not even done with the first step yet. Do you know what I mean? Like the whole first sweep of like how this works. And do I have a second book in the pipeline? Absolutely. Right. And I need people, like anybody who reads Parallel and goes, oh, that's pretty cool, I'd like to see what comes next from there. Like, it's small press. I need people who like then write into SourcePoint and say, we want to see what he's doing next. It's nothing's guaranteed. And a lot of it's out of your hands. Right.
Yeah. Right.
So short answer, absolutely. Long answer, it's complicated.
Yeah. Well, yeah, in a perfect world, I guess that would be something that I'm very similar. Like if I could do just podcasts and nerd Instagram accounts all day, I mean, yeah, that'd be the greatest like day of my life for that to ever happen. But as you said, I got a full-time job as well. So it when you burning candles at both ends, sometimes it gets a little grueling.
Yeah.
So you were saying earlier about how you wrote the first half in a vacuum. When you got on with the artist, like you were saying, it changed everything. You want to go a little in about that?
Oh, dude, it was magic. I don't want to sound too much like a walking cliche, but it was like the comic creator's dream. Being a longtime fan, I have read and seen enough interviews, especially with writers, where I think one of the common refrains is, getting to write for somebody is like a writer's dream. Getting to write for an artist that can take your words and make them better than you ever intended them to be in your head. And for me, that was Adam. From the moment he sent me like the first character sketches and a couple of like sample pages about, I was kind of thinking about this for page 4 kind of thing. I was like, this is unbelievably amazing. Like, and just as a wider point, so many steps along this process, it was just me as a fan nerding out, right? Getting to see like how the sausage is made.
Yeah.
We'll come back to the art in a second, but a quick aside. So Justin Birch, who does letters for everybody and is a brilliant letterer, he did the letters on this book, and he's got a relationship with Travis and Josh Warner at SourcePoint, and so he does a lot of lettering for SourcePoint when he's not busy lettering for like Marvel and whoever, because like he's good. And so we're getting to the lettering phase. And, the whole process is becoming more and more real for me, right? Every time a piece of art comes in, like a finished page, every time we get a step closer, like the giddiness wells up in me and the 12-year-old starts to like lose it and go crazy. But it wasn't 100% real, like the kind of thing that even somebody who talks as much as I do just had to shut up for a minute and go, oh.
Right.
Until Justin, because I was poking at him, but I didn't have the bravery to come up flat out and ask. And Justin goes, you're hitting at something. I'm gonna put you out of your misery. Would you like to do a FaceTime call with me right now and watch me letter a page or two? And I was just like, oh, yes, please. yes, that's exactly what I want. Yes, you get into my 12-year-old head. And yes. So I got to watch him actually put letters, on the page, right? And it just became, in that instant, it just became so real because it was a comic. And I actually felt really bad because I got in his head inadvertently. And I was so nerding out in that moment that as he was doing he looked like, do you know the Spielberg movie, the Spielberg Cruise collaboration, Minority Report?
Yes.
And there's like this, it's the future technology where like Tom Cruise is just like sweeping his hands across. It's moving. The computer screens are kind of holographic. It's very Iron Man, right? Iron Man 2 and 3.
Yeah.
Where Tony's just like swiping at the computer screens because they're kind of in midair as holograms, and it's very much that. And like Justin is so quick with the click this, click that, and the balloon takes a certain shape, right? And then the tail of the balloon is at a exact percentage, and it's muscle memory for him. And I was just watching him in awe doing this. And I totally, again, inadvertently got in his head when I was like, okay, I gotta stop you. Like, how did you know that curve needed to be exactly 45 degrees and stuff? And he stopped. And it was one of those things where when you do something that's muscle memory for so long, and when you think about it, it's like like a baseball player in their swing. Like, don't ask them about the swing because it's gonna jack them up, and they're just gonna like they're gonna hit themselves in the head with the next swing because they're thinking about it too much. And he's like, oh my God, what have you just done? I have no idea why I just did that. I've been doing so long. And I was like, I'm so sorry. I'm like, I'm going to go now. I like literally cut this call short because I was such a fanboy about it that I almost ruined my own book getting lettered because I couldn't help myself.
I don't know why I did that.
No, I was behind the scenes, right?
Right.
I was like I was like in the office next to Stan Lee going like, can you tell me how you did that? And I almost ruined the whole thing. But like getting back to Adam, it was just so cool because, you know, he had more experience than me at that point, you know, making comics, even though it was from the artistic side, not the writing side, that like I got to live that dream / cliche of a lot of comics writers of not only writing for somebody, but like having them interpret your words and make it better. You know, he made he took a couple of pages and dropped it from, you know, 6 panels down to 5 and made it better, you know, made the storytelling better and forced me to make a cut here or a move here. My favorite part, I think, is the second half of the book is definitely darker than the first half. And that's intentional. That was intentional from day one. It was always going to be darker, and the twists and the stakes get raised and the tension starts to crescendo, and Landon's got to make some pretty awful choices about staying in this reality and keeping his mental health and his physical health intact, or taking this risk, the price that he's got to pay for this dream that he's deferred. And it was always going to be that. But like, once I saw what Adam could do, I definitely tweaked things and made it even push it in a further direction script wise. And then his art takes it to another level. There's a couple of panels that are straight up noir. Like my favorite panel in the book is in the second half, and there's this shot of Landon in just complete and utter dejection and despair. He's like sitting in his apartment, he's sitting in this chair, and the light is coming through like the Venetian blinds, and it's just illuminating little bits of his face. And I can stare at that panel all day. Like, I know I wrote it, but like looking at it, it's almost like an out-of-body experience. You go, this is amazing. This is better than I saw it. How did he do that? You and I at the top talked about briefly about like the ambiguity of you know, a lot of the story throughout, and maybe even a little bit of ambiguity at the end where it makes you want to reread it. You know, if you look at the story itself, there's points in the book where you can, from panel to panel, much less page to page, go, oh, this is absolutely real and happening to Landon. And the next page go, it's totally all in his head. He's just losing it. And like he as a character is almost page to page going through that as well. You know, there's these bright moments where he believes he's got it under control and it's gone, and then it comes rushing back in and it's just as real to him as it was before. And there's characters that believe him and characters that don't. And then you kind of feel that way as a reader as well. And yes, that ambiguity is built into the script. I mean, deliberately written. But then Adam did this amazing thing that I didn't honestly know that art could do. And as I'm about to say it out loud, the words don't necessarily make sense, but he can draw ambiguity. Like, I don't even know what that means, but it's true. Like, the dude can draw ambiguity. There are panels where you are seeing two things at once. And it's like, wow. So that was just an amazing, again, fanboy experience, but also just like watching that art get made in a way that is beyond expectation. I think was just, I use this word up top. It was magical.
Well, no, and the art is absolutely stunning. Like whether you try to read it before just what it looks like or the concept, I mean, they're both like top notch. Like I said, for me, like, when I read it the first time, I didn't stop. Like, you sent it to me as a PDF before we did the first interview for the Cultured Nerd. And when I tell you, I did not put it down, my phone almost died. I had to go plug it in because I was literally just, the screen was on and I just couldn't stop, because it was not only entertaining of a read, but it was just stunning. Like there are some panels that I'm just like, this is an indie comic. I actually had to remind myself that this wasn't put out by one of the big two. And that's one of the thing that I've gotten into very much a lot recently is realizing that there's more comics out there than just Marvel and DC. Like, why limit your content? Like last week, I had an interview with another comic book creator. He did Advanced Genetics, which was crowdsourced. We talked to him about how the crowdsourcing was for him. So, like, to hear the different ways you two have gone about getting your work out there, it shows that there's more than one way to do it, and it's not all about luck, like we were talking earlier. Because if he didn't start writing, and if you didn't start writing, or if he didn't decide, I'm just gonna go on Kickstarter, if you didn't, I'm gonna go bring this to the con to see what can happen. You have to put yourself in the right position for that quote unquote luck to happen. And there's different ways to do that. And it's not one of those things that it's just cut and dry. Like so many people, like I on my Nerdpool page, people complain about DC or Marvel because one's good, one's bad. They all have good points. I mean, there are some things like I couldn't be a Marvel or a DC guy because I need Flashpoint and then I need Marvel Civil War. Like I can't have one or the other. If you're gonna tell me we're gonna shoot you or I'm gonna take one of these away from you and you'll never know they existed, I'm right here. Shoot me. I'm done. Because I'm not gonna lose that. Like there's just so much good content out there just to limit yourself to one thing or another because you think you're supposed to, or because you heard from your friend, oh, Marvel's better than DC. I mean, people don't realize all the good stuff that's out there.
Well, the comic industry it's the food pyramid. It's an iceberg. Most of it, you might see Marvel and DC as the tip, and that stuff is delicious and it's wonderful. And I've been a fan my entire life, but most of it is below that. And whether you go a level down and you're talking Image and Dark Horse, or you go several levels down and you're talking about somebody who is doing a Kickstarter to get their book out there in just a couple of copies, or even just publishing online as a webcomic, the vast majority of comics are not that tip of the iceberg. It's everything underneath, and it's independent and it's small. And like I think it really kind of harkens to the importance of supporting small press books, because there isn't, again, not taking anything away from the efforts at the top, but they also have an infrastructure that's been in place for 80 years of how to get a book out into the world, right? And the resources and the time and the energy and the finances to make that happen. Whereas there is a different level of blood, sweat, and tears every level you go down from there. And so like when you spend your, $4 or your $5 or your, if you want, 64 pages of parallel, like your $7, that money means something different. Right? It's not only something that is quite literally feeding and clothing and keeping the lights on, right? It's also there's a piece of support in that, right? You're not just buying it because you are a fan of Wolverine, right? You spending that $7 on my book says something about your love of comics and your love of the industry and your desire to see it keep moving forward, right? Like for those of us who really, really still like that physical copy in our hands, the writing's kind of been on the wall at the big two for a long time, and it's that slow process of digital. I mean, the talking digital has been going on for almost like 2 decades now, but
right.
It's coming, okay? The place you're still going to be able to get your hands on a physical copy of a book is going to be indie comics. So if that's something that you're still interested, or if you're just a fan and part of your dollar you want to say something, which is, I support creators, I support these people who are living their dreams and taking those risks and making something because they love it, again, not because it's a job, that's where your dollar goes further.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I have both the DC and the Marvel app. I read a lot of comics digitally, and sometimes I do prefer that depending on the material, because I can just blow through a whole bunch, not worry about. Because like my biggest thing is I'm back on collecting, and I will buy like a whole bunch of awesome comics and then never open them because I don't want to ruin them. Like I have 5 copies of Batman Three Jokers, the third issue. I have all 5 of the main covers. I've not read it. I have not read it because I'm too afraid to damage it in any way. Not that I'll ever sell them, but the it being a great pristine copy means something to me. So like
I am with you. Like from day one, from my youth to today, even though I took a bit of a sabbatical from collecting comics in the middle, another cliched little bit of a story. I am evenly split down the middle, 50-50, as a fan of creators and a reader and a consumer of the content, and just an old school fanboy nerd collector, where that is a key issue. And it will go into my Mylar, and it will sit there, and I will get it out once a year and go, ooh, isn't it pretty? But you know what? I'm not taking that tape off. Right. Whereas then I'm also going to read my Sandman trades every other year for the rest of my life. You know,
right.
Every time Neil publishes something or Jeff Lemire publishes something, I'm buying that to read. It's literally a 50-50 split down the middle of my fandom, for sure. So I get what you're saying.
Yeah, I've been trying I don't have a huge following or anything, but I do try to like get people to see that if you like the content, even if you just like digital, you should go support local comic book stores, local creators, or creators in general, because without them, you're going to be very, very limited to what you'll be able to read. Because if all those stores go out, then it will only be digital. It'll only be from Marvel and DC, and then you're going to be kind of upset that you can't find something like a Parallel or any of the other indie, or even like I said, the Dark Horse or Image Comics. Like a lot of people don't even know that they exist. Like Savage Dragon. I said it to someone the other day. They were like, "Who?" And I was like, "Are you kidding me? You say you like comics? You don't have to like them, but at least know he exists." You know what I mean? Like, and a lot of people don't get that. It's this. I think it's the culture we're in now, where you're either for this or against that. Like there is no middle ground, and with comics, there very much is. Like you said, it's not just about the big two. A lot of what that, if anyone knows what an iceberg looks like, there's only a little bit you see on the top, but the thing is huge, and it just keeps going.
I've got a very, very firm belief that comics as a storytelling medium it's probably the most malleable medium, right? Yes, it does all the things that prose can do. It does all the things that film can do, and it does a whole bunch of stuff that neither can do. There is literally no story that is impossible to tell in comics. And then I think one of the great things about indie comics is it takes that malleability and also sloughs off the shackles that like a big two has with, we talked about the advantages of having 80 years of infrastructure of making books, but that also comes with a bit of restraint, because what worked for them over those 80 years is primarily, tights and capes. And while they venture out of that, for some eras more often than others or whatever, there's still a amount of limitations. There's stories that they won't tell because the marketing model doesn't support it over the last decades.
Right.
Indie comics don't have those restraints. So what the great thing is not only do you have the most malleable storytelling medium, but you also then have published every single type of story, right? Does Parallel still have a sci-fi twist? Of course it does. I mean, is there a parallel world where there's this creepy other version of Landon who is like tempting him with fate? Of course there is, but it's a book about existential dread. Right. Yes. It's a book that really, my biggest point, and the thing that I really want people to take away from it is, like, you've got this thing that most people believe or feel that they experience alone, like however it manifests for you, right? Whether that is full on depression, whether that is just that creeping sense of anxiety or dread or dreams deferred or possibilities lost, like however that manifests for you. The great irony, I think, about this being a universal theme is we all experience it alone, and it's individualized, and yet at the exact same moment, almost everybody is going through some version of it, right?
Right.
And so, like, one of the big things that, and I think that's something that people are responding to when they read the book and something they relate to, and that makes me happy. But like, one of my big points was, and one of the reasons why there's a bunch of themes of mental health in there too, and how Landon is trying to deal with that. Is like, I want people, if one person walks away from reading this, and enjoys it, fantastic. But if one person walks away from this book and is like, you know what, I relate to that, and it is better to get this out and to talk to somebody, whether it's family or a friend, or in Landon's case, like a professional healthcare worker. Like the idea that I am not alone in this and that people can help me with whatever I'm going through. Like one person does that, then it's not good. It's great. It's a win.
No, actually, that's this week. There was a whole bunch of celebrities that posted like the 1-800 hotline, basically saying that we're not all alone. And then I posted on one of them, and then I had all these people like, no, you don't understand. Some people are alone. You don't understand. I'm like, no, actually, that's where you don't understand. I do. I completely understand that. I was you. I was one that said, no one can fix my problems. I'm just going to deal with it alone. It'll be fine. And I'm telling you, if the fact that you're talking to me right now shows you're not alone. You can DM me right now. Like if you want to talk, I will be happy to talk. I mean, it's, and then they just kept, there was numerous people that are saying that. I'm like, I'm not kidding. If you think I'm playing, DM me right now and I will talk to you.
You know
like,
what?
I don't.
It's so funny, Kyle. It's so funny that you're saying that, because I want anybody who's listened to this, who's been interested in anything that we've talked about today, like I totally want you to come over and follow me on Instagram right now. And I'll tell you why. So it's just at J Douglas Writes. Okay. Come and see me on Instagram. Give me a follow. You DM me there and I will talk to you longer than you want me to. I've not big timed a single human yet. I get somebody who there was this dude, this, I call him a kid because I'm an old man, but he was like in his early 20s, and he's like, I read your book. I have a few questions for you. I don't want to bother you. I know you're busy. You spare a few minutes. And he's like, I'll only ask you a couple questions. I got like 10, but I only ask 2. By the end of it, he was like, so listen, thanks for talking to me and everything, but I have to go. And I'm like, oh, I see. You come and follow me on Instagram. You want to talk about process. You want to talk about the book. You want to talk about Star Wars. You want to talk about Stephen King. Most likely what's going to happen is you're going to say, listen, I have to go. I've got a life. I don't know where you're finding this time. I don't know either, but yeah, you want to come over and chat with me, please come follow me. J Douglas Writes on Instagram. Speaking of which, I mean, just from a pure business perspective, I'm going to be doing a couple of giveaways coming up soon. I'm going to give away some signed books and even a signed copy of one of our sold out variants. So like that's another reason to come and hang out. But like, if you want to talk, I'm your guy. I will not shut up.
No, like I said, and then I plan on giving it a little bit of time. That I'm going to reach out to those specific people who commented on that. But they haven't reached out as of yet. And I'm like, I think people just assume that people don't care. And there are people left out there. Anyone who's listening who doesn't believe me, there's 2 people on this call right now, literally, that said, DM me and you will end up telling us to go away. And that is 100% true. So that's something that I want to hope everyone understands, is that we're not kidding. Like, we're the type of people, I can tell, like, you have something you want to talk about. You're going to end up being like, all right. So we started this talk at 3:00. It's now 9:30. I have work in the morning. I gotta go.
Well, it happened right here live. We're in the middle of an interview that you and I had a small conversation ahead of time going, yeah, probably about 30 minutes. I think we're pushing an hour right now. This is anybody who does not believe what we're saying, you have proof positive in what you're listening to right now, that if you need somebody to talk to, there are 2 gentlemen right here that will go over whatever your expectation was.
It's because when you love something, or when you actually care, you can just talk forever. Like with the creating a comic, or just comics in general, Star Wars, whatever it is. I mean, you could just go on. I mean, when you find something like, and I talk about this in a couple of my other episodes, being a nerd is not necessarily something geeky or something like that. It's being unapologetically okay with liking something and not caring what other people say about it. So like, I can nerd out about so many things, sports included. Like, I mean, that's like I say, if you like football or anything, you're a football nerd. you can't escape it. Like, they may not like that title because they've been picking on us their whole lives with that term, but they are. I mean, if you can sit there and watch a football game and go, look, we're doing well, and you're not on the team, you're a nerd.
Well, I said this joke first time like more than a decade ago, and I think it was my first dad joke ever. But like, fantasy football is D&D for football nerds. That's all it is.
Yes.
Like, give me a break, guys. Like, I don't care what pedestal you're standing on. You're playing D&D, but you're just doing it with
football players
that crash into each other with helmets on. That's the only thing. It's just different kind of armor, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, I'm with you.
No mortal wounds. Okay, fine. I can do this. It's fine, I guess. I mean,
yeah.
They fumble it. He rolled a nat 1 on that one. Damn it. No, sorry. So we'll get a little back on topic here. So you said you have a second book in the works. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, I'm a passion project by definition. Post World War II, small town Michigan, very much inspired also by a lot of my students and some of the things that they go through even in the 21st century, even though this book takes place in 1946, and very much inspired by my late grandma and some of the things that she went through. So it's a story of Jane who, in the middle of the war, when she's only 12 and her father dies on a mission in Europe, some powers manifest. This is not in the world at the time, but like, she's got strength and she's got speed. Okay, nothing flashy, but because the world is what the world is, she's got to hide it. And so thematically, you've got this book, and now we flash forward to 1946 when all the soldiers are home, and her mother, who was a legit Rosie the Riveter, no longer has a job, and the family can't support themselves. And Jane goes off to hopefully get a secretarial job at the same factory that her mom worked at, that her dad worked at before the war. And her strength is kind of revealed, and she kind of gets this job there. It's very much a story thematically about being in the closet, about who you are. Right. And I think my favorite thing about this story is there's so much actual real family history and truth in the setting and the reality of it. It takes place mostly, the main setting is in this factory that is making Marsden mats during the war and has a contract afterwards. And this is a real store or a real factory in Plymouth, Michigan, that was started out as a place called Wall Wire. And they made wires before the war, and then they got a government contract to make Marsden mats. And those are, even if you don't know the name, those are those big, long strips of like corrugated metal that became the temporary runways in Europe and the Pacific. Mm-hmm. So you just cut down a bit of jungle or a beach and you've got a runway. Yeah. And only 2 factories in the United States kept that contract after the war that led into the Berlin airlift and stuff. There was one in Alabama and there was one here. And my great-grandfather actually worked in that factory. And then the best part, my favorite part about putting this project together was there was this research aspect where I went and found the factory and got in, check this out, 5 days before they tore it apart and turned it into like sectioned off office building things. Wow. And I got to see all the original machinery and fittings and woodwork and the brickwork, and I've got like video. So like I was fired up about that part of it. It's this great opportunity that I've got. The first script is done out of like 4 issues. Everything else is plotted out. The character bios are there. The story beats are there. The research is there. And it's this great opportunity to talk about something else I was very passionate about, which is like, I've had all these young ladies come through my classroom over the last handful of years, right? These 8th graders becoming high schoolers, and especially my girls who still struggle even in the 21st century about truly being comfortable with who they are. Mm-hmm. Whether that be a gender thing or a race thing or a religion thing, and they still feel somehow encumbered by the truth of who they are, and they can't necessarily express that as much as they want to, or be as comfortable in their skin as they can. And then you extrapolate that back to 1946, where gender and race are just exponentially more right. Yep. Problematic for people. And getting to tell the story, kind of in a character that embodies some of the traits and hopes and dreams that my grandmother had at that age. It's been really, really special to me. So it's something I'm kind of waiting on word for right now, and hopefully to get off the ground, because it's ready to go. It's just like a push a go button, but the industry is kind of crazy right now. So,
Oh yeah.
it is, as well as, hey, anybody and everybody, if you want to support me, if you want to support indie comics, you go to the Source Point Press website, you go to their web store and you order Parallel. You go to Instagram and you go to J. Douglas Writes and you follow me and you ask me questions. As much as like, hey, you want to support your local shop, you can still go in there right now and go up to your clerk and say, hey, this is the diamond order code, because SourcePoint still has some copies of Parallel. And if you go and say, hey, can you get me this book? And the order code is FEB20 1983, which is super easy to remember, because 1983, the Jedi. So FEB20 1983, you want to do it that way and get a copy of Parallel? That's fantastic. Thank you very much for your support. Hopefully you love it. The other thing I really want to push is, you write SourcePoint right now and say, hey, I read Parallel, or I just listened to this interview and I want to see what comes next, or I want to see this 1946 period piece with like underlying superhero themes, but also like identity themes. Send them an email and put some pressure on somebody to make this project made, because I want my dream to continue, right?
Right.
You and I talked about full-time, part-time, irrelevant to me right now. I've got another story I really want to tell. I want to put out in the world that I'm really proud of, that I'm really passionate about, that would honor my grandmother, does honor to like all the young ladies who have come through my classroom over the last couple of decades. I need to get that made, and I can't do it alone. So that's the weirdest plug I think I've ever given, but I love it. Like, go buy my book for sure, but also because that says something too, right?
Right.
But go tell them that you want to see the next project.
Well, and anyone who's listening, I mean, like I said, I read it, and I have read it numerous times, and there are a lot of like Marvel and DC comics where I put it down going, yeah, that wish I didn't do that. So I mean, like if you talk about like the clone saga for Spider-Man, like some of those issues, I'm just like, I really wish I never read that. I don't feel that way about Parallel, and I mean, anyone who's listening, definitely go follow and harass, for lack of a better word, the SourcePoint Press, because I don't know, just you told me about this early on in the process, like when I interviewed a while back, but now for some reason, hearing it the way you just explained it, like I saw it in my head for like a split second. I was like, oh, wait, I want that, like because when it was different because last one we did over email, like when hearing you talk about it, like my brain literally, like I saw like a lone female, like black and white, like with a huge shadow, like hiding the fact that she just jumped off a building. Like,
yeah,
I literally saw that and I was like, whoa, wait a minute.
Well, I'll tell you, you know what? I'm gonna spoil something. I'm gonna spoil something that I've never told anybody else, except for anybody who's ever read the script. And there is that panel. It's not exactly that panel, but that panel exists. There is a scene at the factory where she's there as now a 15-year-old. Jane's there, and she's talking to her mom and dad's old boss, who's a sympathetic guy, about like hopefully just getting a secretarial job, right? Because that's the role. And all those positions are filled with pretty 22-year-olds that the owner has hired. I mean, there's no way she's getting hired for that. And as much as he's sympathetic, and as much as he's asking after mom, who he had to let go a month before because everybody came home from the war, and you see Jane, panel by panel, she kind of drifts back and back and back, and you see her head getting lower, and he keeps on just talking and like, and there's this scene where, in this factory, like, and this is from my research, like, there's these big racks kind of along the factory floor where all the Marsden mats were kind of collected up in the sky, and then go down on your pulleys and your chains and loaded onto trucks to go off, so the planes could fly them over to Europe. And as she's walking, and as he's walking ahead of time, one of them comes loose, and 20 tons of steel is going to come down and crush him. And you've got this panel where it's almost comic book cliche, but it's it's worked since the late 1930s, and it still works in
Right.
2020, where he's like this, and it's coming down, and it goes to black, and he's not dead. And I've got the Superman the movie when the baby's holding up the truck thing, and she's just sitting there with no effort at all, just holding it up, and he's not being crushed, and it's like the big reveal, right? And now somebody else knows, and the consequences come from that.
Okay, yeah, that I'm hooked. That's literally from one panel, like hooked. But I mean, so yeah, definitely I'm gonna start pushing that, and they're gonna end up probably blocking me for how many messages I send out, because I desperately I no joke, when you explained it, I saw that in my mind, and just
Yeah.
like
Hey, clearly, me too, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Oh man,
I'll tell you what, I'm gonna be honest with you. I fully 100% endorse and support your borderline stalking efforts on my behalf.
This is the way.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I think we're pushing. We're at what, a little over an hour already, and so what we're gonna do, I want to give you last check into here, just to plug all of your Instagram and all that information you want, and definitely everyone, if you haven't read Parallel, definitely try to get yourself a copy. Like you said, he'll give you the diamond code here in a second, where you can just request it from your local comic book store to support both. But yeah, just go ahead and read, and then go ahead, Jason.
Yeah. So 4 quick things, really quick. Yep. Number 1, come and hang out with me on Instagram. J Douglas Writes. The more the merrier. I'm doing some giveaways coming up fairly soon in the next few months, and would love to chat with everybody. Number 2, you can get your copy of Parallel straight through SourcePoint Press if you want. That supports small press. It supports creators. It supports me. And they actually, in quarantine times, support through some initiatives, local businesses that are having a hard time staying open. So it's not even just supporting. I mean, you can support local businesses by supporting them as well. Head over to their website. I sent Kyle the link as well. You hit me on Instagram, I'll give you the link, but it's they're through Oxide Media. But if you go to sourcepointpress.com and go to their store, you can find Parallel there and order it. Very reasonable shipping rates. If you want to directly, and you have the ability to walk into your local shop, you can still order it through the Diamond order code FEB20 1983. If they are like, what is Parallel? What is SourcePoint Press? And who is this Jason Douglas Yahoo? Like, if they can't do that for you, and but given that I am an order code, and they should be able to do it. Now, if they don't want your business for some reason, just go over to SourcePoint Press and order it that way. But those are the ways to get it. Come over to Instagram. I've got a direct link to 3 variant covers. Beautiful variant covers of this book have been made. 2 of them are sold out and only pop up on eBay right now, occasionally, for the prices that are ridiculous, but also fan the fires of nerddom and fandom in my heart, where I'm like, ooh, that's pretty cool.
That's yeah.
There's one, I've got a direct link to the one that is not quite sold out yet, and you've got a copy of it, and
yes.
Love it, and it's a beautiful cover. And there's a few of those left. I got a direct link to that. And then last but not least, one more time, hey, I want my dream to keep going, and I can't do that without some people like writing SourcePoint directly and saying, I want to see the next thing. So those are kind of the 4 bits and pieces, but I truly appreciate the time today. This was a ridiculous amount of fun. And,
absolutely.
If
yes.
took anything away from it, more the merrier. Thanks.
Oh, thank you again. This was awesome. We'll have to do it again when, not if, when the next one comes out. And don't worry, it's my official mission. I feel like I was just given Baby Yoda. I am quested. Nice. I am quested on this mission, and by Creed. So yeah, it was a pleasure talking with you, and we're gonna have to do this again sometime.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Thanks, man.